The offseason is here. Free agency has begun. There has been some shocking signings and deals, and it's all with the goal of one objective: make your team better than last year to compete for a Stanley Cup. In order to do that, you got to know your weaknesses and what went wrong in the previous season, and that's what we're looking at here today with all 32 teams in the NHL. So let's take a deep dive into what went wrong for every team, both on and off the ice, where they sucked the most, where was their weakness, and where they should go next. Let's start in the Pacific, or the Pillow Fight division, as Connor McDavid said, and it's almost fitting that we begin with the team that eliminated him in the Anaheim Ducks. The Ducks started the year in a rebuild. They hired Joe Quenneville and instantly became one of the most exciting young teams in the league. They made the playoffs as the last wildcard team and got knocked out in round number 2. So where did they fall short? Well, it's defending and just overall youth. The Ducks' strength this season was scoring goals. They played a very fast-paced style of game that could carve you up on the rush, and they really leaned into the mobility of their defensemen like Lacombe, Zellweger, and Minyakov to jump in on the play and activate in the O-zone to create more offense. But that same youth and style of play meant difficulties defending. Anaheim gave up way too many chances off the rush, which put players in immediate pressure and prevented them from thinking clearly when returning in the D-zone. They also struggled defending in zone as well, as all of it led to the 4th worst goals against average in the league. It was eventually exposed by Vegas in round 2, and it's ultimately why Anaheim was sent to Cancun early. It's clear that next season, the Ducks want to get better defensively if they want to take the next step, but that may be harder than expected as they have a lot of turnover on the right side of their defense. Next, we have the Vegas Golden Knights. Yep, even a team that went to the Stanley Cup final does indeed have a flaw, and it ended up being a pretty costly one in the end. All year long, the Vegas Golden Knights were one of the best teams analytically, especially defensively. They packed the house extremely well in their box plus one system, and they defended very well in the neutral zone to limit rush chances. The issue is that my drunk uncle could have made more saves for the Golden Knights throughout the regular season than probably their goaltending in this year. They had the worst goaltending metrics throughout the entire season, but when they fired Bruce Cassidy and brought in John Tortorella, that was when he decided to roll with Carter Hart, who is finally healthy. They ran with him as the guy, and Hart played very well in rounds 1 to 3. By then, we saw the full capabilities of what this Vegas team could accomplish when they finally got some goaltending. But in the final, Hart's play dipped significantly, allowing 4+ goals in almost every single game and cost Vegas in the end. The Vegas Golden Knights are as cutthroat as it gets, and I wouldn't be surprised if they try and make an upgrade in the crease to make sure that that doesn't happen again. Speaking of goaltending, that's a touchy subject over in Edmonton, and it has been a very popular reason why as to people say they can't win the big one over the last couple seasons. Listen, the goaltending is not great, and you're not going to win a Stanley Cup with Shanghai, Tristan Jarry, and Connor Ingram as your tandem, but the problems, they go deeper in Edmonton from top to bottom. They didn't defend well enough as a 5-man unit, and under sustained pressure, they could get exposed at the top of the zone between the seams of the winger and center, but where the problems really lied was around the net, as they allowed the most rebound goals in the league. That's both a testament to their goaltending, giving up those rebounds, and also their ability as a D-core to box out opponents in front of the net. They also don't have the roster depth needed to support Draisaitl and McDavid, and so when they were both not healthy in round 1, they were sent packing to Cancun quicker than they expected. So look for the Oilers to try and improve on all fronts this offseason. Systematically, you can expect some changes with Mike Babcock coming into the mix. We're going to see if the whole Babcock experiment fails or surprises everyone. Next is the LA Kings. LA looked like they were really sucking there for a bit when they decided to fire coach Jim Hiller and bring in DJ Smith in the interim. Their biggest issue and weakness last season was simple: they couldn't score goals. Despite remaining one of the NHL's stronger defensive teams, LA finished amongst the league's lowest scoring offenses, and those problems became even more obvious in the playoffs, where they managed just 5 goals in 4 games. LA made the switch to become more passive in the neutral zone with a 1-2-2 instead of the 1-3-1 that they played the year before. The Kings didn't take a step back defensively, but when they were able to create a turnover and do something with the puck, it became a real challenge, especially off the rush. Looking at the Kings' entire roster, their top players like Panarin and Byfield were above average in terms of controlled zone entries, but it was only those two that were above average on the team as well when it came to entries leading to a scoring chance. They just weren't dynamic enough offensively, and so they attempted the right right thing by trying to suffocate Colorado in the first round, but they just couldn't get that extra goal when they needed it most. There's some solid pieces on this Kings team, but if they want to improve, they're probably going to need to get their D more involved in the play while also improving the overall offensive skill on the roster. Next is the San Jose Sharks, and no one expected them to make this much of a leap this season, and it was mostly on the back of Macklin Celebrini. An MVP caliber year at 19 years old has given Sharks fans a glimpse of what's to come in the future, and that is that the future is indeed teal. And even though he single-handedly won them games at times throughout the year, it takes more than a one-man army to be successful in the NHL. The Sharks are a young and rebuilding team that showed their youth on a lot of nights. Similar to Anaheim, San Jose doesn't quite score at the same clip that the Ducks did, but they're also worse at defending too. And when you have Macklin Celebrini, who's already one of, if not the best rush players in the world because of how well he attacks the middle of the ice, it didn't convert to as many goals as it should have, as the Sharks' surrounding cast struggled to create an initial chance or a shot off the rush. With Ivor Stenberg now there, though, that could change next season. Defensively, despite Celebrini having the tool set and IQ to play an incredibly complete two-way game at his age, defending and having success in the NHL requires all five players. The Sharks and their young core struggled to do that consistently last year, and it's why they didn't sneak their way into a playoff spot. It definitely looks like the days of them sucking are over, because the future in San Jose is bright, especially with them revamping their entire D-core at this past draft. They're going to be one of the most intriguing teams going into next season. Unfortunately, that is not the case for the Seattle Kraken. Seattle is the living embodiment of mid ever since they've come into the league. Their biggest problem for their lack of success this past season and beyond is their kink for seemingly wanting every single middle six forward in the league. They finished near the bottom of the NHL in terms of goals scored, and World Junior legend and captain Jordan Eberle was the guy who led the team in scoring. He's 35, by the way. Players like Shane Wright and Matty Beniers have yet to reach their potential or take the next step, and that has left this team with no real game changers. What's left is a team right in the mushy middle and without any consistent identity to play to on any given night. That has led to another season of missed playoffs and a destination that has become so undesirable that even Jason Robertson is turning down 15 sheets to be a Seattle Kraken. If Seattle wants to take another step, they need a complete buy-in from every single player on that roster. Without the talent, they can't afford to not play with an identity, and if they don't, well, the sucking is just going to last a little bit longer. Now, before we continue, today's video is sponsored by our good friends over at Saley. The only thing worse than being a Sens or Blackhawks fan right now is getting stuck on vacation with no internet. Trust me, we've all been there, and that is where Saley comes in. Saley is the eSIM app that gives you affordable, reliable data in over 200 destinations to avoid any unexpected roaming fees. It is super convenient also. Once the Saley eSIM is installed, there's no need to install a new eSIM for each country. I personally have used Saley for a few trips now and will continue to anywhere I go, as it allows me to stay connected throughout the season while I'm away especially. They also have support 24/7, so if anything goes wrong, they got you covered. They are hooking you guys up with an exclusive 15% off discount on Saley data plans. So if you're going away for the summer, make sure you use code hockey at checkout when you download the Saley app, or you can go to saley.com/hockey, which is linked in our description down below, so that you can make your trip worry-free while staying connected with Saley. Let's move on to Calgary. Calgary really didn't stand a chance this year, as they came in with a roster that could have competed, but a brutal start basically kick-started the rebuild and led them to trading pieces like Nazem Kadri and Rasmus Andersson. After that happened, it only got worse. They struggled to score immensely. They were a bottom 5 team in the NHL in terms of goals scored for, and it didn't matter what tactics they implemented. The roster simply was not good enough. They do have some good young pieces coming up, though. They did some tidy work this offseason already, drafting Carson Karls and trading for Simon Nemec, while they also have Zane Parekh pushing to take another step next season. It's been a dark couple years for Calgary, and it could be a few more until they stop sucking, but if they do it right, they could build something special for the future. Then we move on to the team who got kicked in the teeth more than anyone else, and that is the Vancouver Canucks. It was just a few years ago that this squad was one goal away from beating the Edmonton Oilers and going to the conference final. It's easy to forget actually that they started this season with Quinn Hughes on the team, but after injuries completely took over half the roster and they were a walk-in hospital, Vancouver was behind the 8 ball and could never catch up. After that, Quinn Hughes told management that he wasn't going to resign, and so that officially marked the beginning of the rebuild in Vancouver. From there, it was a steep and quick downward run all the way to the basement of the standings, and the worst part is that they didn't even get the first overall pick. But when there's this much pain, there was some good things that came out of it. They hired a new coach in Manny Malhotra, and they drafted his son 3rd overall. Caleb Malhotra is projected to be an elite center for a very long time in this league, but we're going to see how that whole father-son dynamic works out and if it creates any more Vancouver drama. Right now, though, they're in a rebuild with some intriguing pieces caught in the middle of the storm. Moving on to the Central is the Colorado Avalanche. Now, let's be extremely clear. The Avalanche never really sucked this year. In fact, they were one of the best teams we've ever seen. Unfortunately, even if that's the case, in the regular season, you win the President Trophy, and that means you get the good old-fashioned President Trophy curse. If you don't believe in voodoo, let's dive into what really went wrong here, and that's the two things that ended their season in Vegas. First, and maybe foremost, the biggest factor was injuries. Both McKinnon and Makar were not 100% in that series, and it impacted how they could expose Vegas. But second was their depth. Necas and Nelson, who were key contributors all throughout the regular season, only managed to get 2 assists in that series against Vegas. Colorado was a team that preferred to create most of its damage off the rush, but against that Vegas stingy 1-2-2 in the neutral zone, their best guys could never get cooking. You throw in the fact that the power play was not good all season long, Colorado fell well short of expectations that everyone had for them going into the playoffs. They've also lost a lot of pieces so far this offseason, but I'd imagine that they're going to be desperate and active to do anything to keep that window open for as long as they can with Makar and McKinnon still in their prime. Now let's go to the Dallas Stars. After 2 straight conference finals and having a pretty damn good regular season, many expected Dallas once again to go deep. But the thing that ultimately sunk them was their 5-on-5 play in their first-round matchup against Minnesota. The Wild dictated play at even strength. They outscored Dallas 14-4 in that first-round series. The Stars had a 3% shooting percentage when 5-on-5, which is pretty much unheard of, but you can point to Rupe Hintz being hurt or the Minnesota goaltending. But the Wild just did a fantastic job at taking away the middle of the ice, stuffing entries on the blue line, blocking shots, and cleaning up second chances all series long. That being said, Dallas should have the talent to break through all of that, but in a league that focuses on results, they didn't, and now they're in danger of losing their star winger, Jason Robertson, who also just happens to be their most productive 5-on-5 player on that squad currently. So that could be a big step back for a Dallas team that feels like they should have already won a cup with this core. However, it is still early in the offseason, and we're going to see what happens next. That brings us to Minnesota, who have had one of their most successful seasons they had in years, but it ended in round 2 to the Colorado Avalanche. The Wild went balls to the wall last year, picking up Quinn Hughes in an attempt to go all in. He was easily the most impactful player for them in the playoffs, but they spent a ton of assets trying to get him, and that left them without the ability to pick up a true number 1 center. An injured Eriksson Ek and a Colorado team that really leveraged their speed against a slower and heavier Minnesota squad, it ultimately led to their demise. They blew a 3-0 lead in Game 5, and it encapsulated how Colorado beat them in that series. They were able to beat Minnesota's man coverage to the net and up high because of that speed and skill, and when they really needed an answer, it was the Avs superstars that took over that game. Sometimes you're just beat by the better team. Minnesota bringing in Hughes is a huge step, but they're going to need a little bit more if they want to truly get over the hump. Now let's go to the Utah Mammoth. Utah finally got a real team name, and what do you know? They make the playoffs. Utah was one of the most skilled and effective rush teams in the league last season. They drew Vegas in round 1, and early in the series, they were able to not only create offense off the rush, but also create some dangerous grade A chances by picking apart Vegas on the perimeter and isolating that winger in the box +1. But Utah, being a young team, got a taste of what playoff hockey is like in the playoffs, and they learned firsthand that rush offense dries up. And as we know, Vegas put on a clinic defensively in the neutral zone to shut down Utah's deadliest weapons by forcing them to give up possession at the blue line. Utah were also middle of the pack when it came to scoring goals in high danger areas, ranking 14th in the NHL, but against a Vegas team that did really well to shut down the house and the inner slot, Utah struggled to get into the interior, and it ultimately led to them going to Cancun just a week and a half later than everyone else. The future is still bright in Utah, though. They have some tremendous young talent, and the next step for them, with more playoff experience under their belt, will be learning how to win those types of tightly contested games. Moving on to the St. Louis Blues, and what went wrong for them was simply offense. Scoring goals was a chore for them. 28th ranked offense, and outside of Robert Thomas, it was inconsistency everywhere. Jordan Kyrie's production dropped significantly, and the club lacked a true game-breaking goal scorer capable of taking over games. The other issue was goaltending. Jordan Binnington was the starter for Team Canada, but his advanced stats were absolutely god-awful this past season. He was the worst goalie in terms of goals saved above expected, and while defensively they didn't do him any favors, but if you can't stop the ones you're supposed to, it's really hard to contend. But perhaps the biggest thing that went wrong for them was that they went on a heater after the trade deadline. They became the best team for a stretch of games there, and it took them away from getting a good draft pick, and they end up in the mushy middle, which is exactly where they stand today. They did use that pick to pick up Mason McTavish this offseason, and they have some really good pieces, but they just seem like a team right now that is in an awkward phase. They could go either way with this roster going into next season. The same could be said for the Nashville Predators, which is currently the retirement home of the NHL. This team 5 years ago may have been a wagon, but Father Time is their biggest enemy. The old guard of Ryan O'Reilly, Philip Forsberg, and Steven Stamkos are leading the way, but the entire roster simply lacked the speed to play at a successful level. In terms of top-end skating speed, they were second last in the NHL, and when you lack the pace like Nashville does, all areas of the game become 10 times harder. Whether that's tracking back to break up a rush play or getting up as quickly to create a rush of your own, Nashville was consistently behind the play all season long in a league that is increasingly getting faster and faster. The Preds are in dire need of getting younger and quicker, and if they want to make the most of whatever is left of this core, they're going to have to do just that. Let's go on to Winnipeg. After winning the President Trophy last season, Winnipeg got off to a slow start, but then things really got off the rails when Connor Hellebuyck got injured. The Hart Trophy and Vezina winner being out for almost 8 weeks was no bueno, as they lost 11 in a row at that time, and that pretty much sealed the deal for this team, especially because their depth up front was nowhere near the quality it needed to be. A bottom 10 offense in the NHL outside of the Scheifele line, there just wasn't a lot of production coming from their lineup. If you look at their center depth from last season, it's not hard to see why. It was Nemestikov, Lowry, or Taves. It just was not enough creativity there to help out that top line. Put all of it together and you have a miserable season for Winnipeg that has questions surrounding the future direction of this team. It's a ton of expectation, but a player like Viggo Bork, who is their first-round pick, can come right into that lineup and provide an offensive spark that they desperately need. But it all depends what direction Winnipeg wants to go to. Next is the Chicago Bedards. There was a moment there where Chicago was showing true signs of growth, but that's no coincidence that at the same time, Connor Bedard was tearing up the league. Bedard came into the season a noticeably better player on both sides of the puck. He was faster, stronger, and more responsible defensively. But they're called the Chicago Bedards for a reason. It's been the same story for Chicago ever since Bedard entered the league. There is simply just not enough talent around him to make Chicago even slightly competitive. Even if he's doing all the right things away from the puck, his teammates struggled to get him possession in all three zones. For a player of Bedard's offensive caliber, he spends far too much defending because of his surroundings. Defensively, they don't really have anyone on the back end to officially break out the puck and get Bedard some action. And so it was yet another basement finish for the Blackhawks, and it's part of the reason why they traded the 4th overall pick for a guy like Bowen Byram. Now we're going to see how that pans out, but the Blackhawks needed and continue to need more puck movers who can get Bedard started on offense, and Chicago playing on their toes instead of always on their heels. Let's move over to the East, and we're actually going to start with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Everyone had them pinned to be a lottery team at the beginning of the year, but first-year head coach Dan Hughes came in and reinvigorated the core of this team. Sid, the middle-aged man, is still incredible. So is Malkin in the middle, but as a team, he had them playing far more aggressive up ice and turned them into one of the better forechecking teams in the league. They shorted the zone incredibly well. Their 2-1-2 goal line offense that is catered towards the strength of Sidney Crosby kept opponents on their heels more often than not, but that aggression did come with a price, as they would be vulnerable to counterattacks. It hurt them all year long, as the price for their top 3 offense was apparently a bottom 10 defense in terms of goals allowed. Ultimately, that led to their downfall against Philadelphia. Philly packed the slot and protected the house incredibly well against Pittsburgh. Despite the Penguins carrying the play for majority of the series, Philly stayed committed to the structure and waited to strike on counterattacks. In the end, it was the difference to send Sid on the first flight back to Cabo, and going forward, the Penguins are going to try and do whatever they can to get younger and faster while supporting this core group for their last push for a Stanley Cup. That brings us over to the Philadelphia Flyers, who also surpassed everyone's expectations going into this season. The Flyers, after the Olympics, were one of the better teams in the NHL, especially in one category, and that was rush chances. No one in the second half of the season had a better rush offense than the Flyers. Their stingy defensive play and overall commitment to their structure made their transition offense their strength. Other areas of their offense weren't as strong, though, mostly because of their roster makeup, where most of it was felt on the power play. It was dead last in the regular season, and it was the third worst in the playoffs. They got eliminated in the second round by the Stanley Cup champs, but getting swept is not a great look. Their power play failed them in key times during that series, and Carolina, like they did against most teams, exposed their passivity on the forecheck. The Hurricanes used these little bump back plays to avoid the initial pressure of Philly, and then used a quick up once they back off to catch them caught up ice. There's some positive momentum going on for the Flyers right now, but they're still in need of more dynamic offensive players. Whether that comes to fruition is something we're going to have to wait and see this offseason. Let's go to the Washington Capitals now. The Caps' 5-on-5 play was indeed their biggest strength through most of the season. They had a plus 33 goal differential in that area, but tactically, the problems were their special teams. Power play did them no favors, being ranked 25th in the league. What was once the most feared power play because of the threat of Ovi in his office has now become the very thing that holds it back. It has become stagnant and predictable, and with Ovi having the beer league boots on now, his overall mobility on entries or shifting up and down the flank is very limited. Because of that, as a unit, they struggle to set up consistently off a controlled zone entry and rarely get any time for a solid chance. Injury to key pieces as well throughout the season, like John Carlson and Pierre-Luc Dubois, certainly didn't help, and all of it led to them falling just short of a playoff spot. That being said, they've already made it a point to get faster on the wing by bringing both Alex Tuch and Jordan Kyrou into the fold, so we're going to see if those moves indeed move the needle to help Washington get back in the playoffs next season. Coming in next is the Columbus Blue Jackets, and everything went wrong for Columbus in the final stretch of this season. After firing the coach and bringing in Rick Bowness, the Blue Jackets went on a heater that got them back into the playoff race, but then they went on a brutal stretch near the end of the season that saw them lose 8 of their last 10, and it prompted one of the most wild post-game interviews we've ever seen from Coach Rick Bowness. He fully called out the culture of the team, saying if he's back, he's changing the culture because those guys don't care about losing. He said that losing is not important enough to them, and it's why they're out of the playoffs. You can look at all the tactics and all that stuff, but if Bowness's words are right, maybe that's the only reason that matters, because no matter what structure or players you put in place, if you have a culture that doesn't hate to lose or fully buy in to what you're selling, you're never going to win. And so that put the Columbus Blue Jackets in a really bad spot. Everyone is rumored to be leaving or wanting to leave, which could be another indication in of itself. It is dark times in Columbus, and for their sake, their best hope is having Bowness come in next season and completely whip the fellas into shape. Now, coaching is a hot topic for our next team in the New York Islanders, who were in a playoff spot all year long until the very end. And two bright spots this season were Ilya Sorokin, who had a Vezina caliber year, and the rookie season from a defenseman that everyone is deeming as the next generational talent in Matthew Schaefer. Analytically, the underlying numbers suggested that the dam could break at any moment for the Islanders, and it did at the worst possible time right at the end. In an effort to try and get things on the rails, they fired Coach Patrick Waugh and hired Pete DeBoer, but it was too little, too late. They had the 30th ranked power play in the league, and their roster is still in that awkward in-between phase of a full-on rebuild versus retool. But one thing is abundantly clear. Matthew Schaefer completely changed the dynamic and future of this organization. I fully expect Pete DeBoer to implement the system that maximizes his abilities in all three zones. It's easier said than done, but they may need more play drivers if they want to get back into the playoffs. And so another team that disappointed a lot of people were the New Jersey Devils. It's hard not to say that the season went completely upside down when Jack Hughes hurt his hand at dinner and slicing his finger with a knife that basically had him out for weeks of the season. Injuries plagued the entire lineup throughout the year as well, but they almost had no secondary scoring. When their stars weren't producing, it was like pulling teeth trying to produce offense. On top of that, they struggled at 5-on-5 finishing with a minus 43 goal differential while failing to generate enough quality chances. Jacob Markstrom wasn't great either, and so they're moving on from that project. And the combination of injuries, shallow scoring depth, and poor even strength play ultimately kept them out of the playoffs and had them on the first jet to Turks and Caicos. Going into next season, they need Jack Hughes to play a full 82 no matter what. They're going to take swings to address that secondary scoring this offseason. I like that they picked up Evan Rodriguez. That's a good start because it was a huge issue for them last season and it led to them falling short. Now, another team that was royally disappointing was the New York Rangers. And what went wrong for New York? Well, everything went wrong for New York. Let's start with the fact that they just played on home ice. They were one of the worst home ice teams in the league last season, and anytime you went to a game, it was the fans who should have been paid to watch the Rangers play that night. Here's the thing with the Rangers. They have talent on that roster, and at times, they were really good defensively, and the metrics reflected it. Despite being a top 10 team in terms of ozone possession, they had one of the worst shooting percentages in the league at one point, and that's because for the most part, there just wasn't a lot of fluidity in the offensive zone. While their best players had flashes, the Ds weren't active enough, which meant that there was not a lot of options to extend plays, and everything was easily pushed to the perimeter, and they ultimately settled for a lot of low danger chances. Things really went off the rails too when both Shesterkin and Fox got hurt. They traded Panarin, and then they released a letter to their fans saying that we're gonna suck, so get used to it. They did sign Dorofeev to a 7-year, $11 million deal, so the Rangers could bounce back, but if it doesn't work out again, there's a lot to clean up there on that roster. Moving on to the Buffalo Sabres, and believe it or not, they didn't totally suck this year. In fact, they were incredible. They won the Atlantic Division, and they did it boasting one of the most intriguing offenses in the NHL. The Sabres were the epitome of modern offense, using motion and almost a positionalist style of offense in the ozone to create mismatches and confusion for defensive coverages. One of the reasons they could do this so well was because of their extremely mobile decor. Going into the playoffs, people had two big question marks for this team. Can they defend well enough to win a playoff round, and can their goaltending hold up? For majority of their run, the answer was yes to both of those, but it was still part of the reason they fell short. The Sabres against Montreal lived by the sword and died by the sword with their offensive style. A team as deadly as Montreal on the counter just had to stay patient enough to create a turnover and catch Buffalo up ice. It's what led to the chance for the Game 7 OT winner against, and it also shined a light on UPL same-day delivery as well. The Sabres goaltending stepped up all season, but ultimately they're left wondering how good this team would look with an upgrade in net, which is probably why they're in on the Hellebuck sweepstakes. Overall, the future does seem bright in Buffalo, so even though some things went wrong to end their season, it was still a whole lot better than it has been in the past decade. Now let's go to the Tampa Bay Lightning. This year was a reminder that hockey can be a funny sport. They had a really good year, finishing with 106 points. Nikita Kucherov won the Hart Trophy. Andrei Vasilevsky won the Vezina Trophy. This team had depth and all the makings to go deep. They went 7 games with the Montreal Canadiens, who stood with them in the pocket toe-to-toe and matched them every step of the way, and it all came down to some clutch performances on behalf of Montreal. Dobish did outperform Andrei Vasilevsky in that series, which has been a concerning trend for Vasilevsky come playoff time in the last few years. But in a Game 7 where Tampa dominated the play and probably should have came out with a win, the Montreal Canadiens made NHL history, pulling off an upset victory with a record low 9 shots on goal. Regardless of how much Tampa carried the play, the NHL is a results league. This is now the 4th straight year this core has been eliminated in the first round, and they're not getting any younger. Tampa has always done a really good job at surrounding this core with good, cost-effective young talent to supplement the top half of their lineup. But the clock is ticking on the Stanley Cup window. That being said, the window is opening up for the Montreal Canadiens, and Montreal and their young core took a massive step in their development this season, going on a deep playoff run to the conference finals and losing to the eventual Stanley Cup champions. But there are some lessons to be learned here. Marty St. Louis has been a fantastic presence for the youth of that locker room, but he's also still relatively inexperienced himself in the coaching realm. He was brilliant to get them to the conference final, but against the Carolina Hurricanes, the inexperience showed both on the bench and on the ice. Montreal was dead set on fighting the panic of Carolina's forecheck, setting up behind the net, and using a stretch pass to try and beat the structure up ice against Carolina. It worked out in Game 1, but then Rod and the Hurricanes adjusted to ensure they had players above their checks, and ultimately, Montreal couldn't get anything going in the neutral zone. It forced the Habs to frequently give up possession at the blue line with almost no hope in getting it back, and it's why Carolina absolutely dominated them in every metric of the conference final. The good thing, though, is that this will likely be just the beginning for this core in Montreal. They're going to be big players with all their assets, and hopefully, when the time comes again, their experience will take them to the next step. Moving on, we go to the Boston Bruins. Boston blew everyone's expectations out of the water. Everyone took one look at that roster at the beginning of the season and said, yeah, they ain't going anywhere. But they proved everyone wrong. A strong buy-in in Coach Marco Sturm's system, along with another unbelievable year from David Pastrnak and a bounce-back season from Jeremy Swayman, got them into the playoffs. They played a relatively passive 1-2-2 that forced their opponents into making mistakes. It's a good system that suits the talent of the roster they had, but it's ultimately why they fell short as well. They did give Buffalo a tough time, forcing them to 6 games. However, their depth couldn't get them over that hump, and I mean, you look at their lineup, there simply was not enough talent there to break the game open. Buffalo was also able to expose the back end of Boston too. Their 2-1-2 forecheck gave the Bruins defenders fits below the goal line, and it was pretty much curtains on the season. Obviously, every team wants better players, but very few need them as bad as Boston if they want to keep whatever this window is open with David Pastrnak. Then we move on to the Senators, who may not even know what the window looks like because this season was a soap opera. Again, if you're into bad juju, you could say this season was doomed the second that kid made another song for the playoffs. But the Sens banished that guy to Taiwan to try and turn it around, and it still didn't work. Goaltending was an issue all throughout the season with Linus Ullmark going through some personal troubles off ice. But when it came down to it, he played lights out down the stretch, and he was the Sens' best player against Carolina, keeping them in every single game. The biggest issue, though, were their star players not performing. Tim Stützle and Brady Tkachuk combined for just 1 assist in 4 games, and they were -8 in that time. More than the on-ice stuff, though, what truly went wrong for Ottawa was the off-ice and their captain, Brady Tkachuk. He never fully seemed bought in, especially after the Olympics and the whole fiasco there. That was echoed by upper management, and it was a real issue reported at the end of the season when Tkachuk said, "Get me to Florida." When your captain and leader has 1 foot out the door, it's hard to have any sustained success. Now, unless Ottawa makes significant improvements this offseason, that Tkachuk trade could set them back years for competing for a Stanley Cup. Another team in purgatory right now, too, is the Detroit Red Wings. They did it again. They made everyone believe in the first half of the season that this is finally the year the Red Wings make it into the playoffs, but then a disastrous March exposed all the flaws in this team, and they once again missed the playoffs, making it a decade drought. On the ice, the problems started in the offensive zone for Detroit. They were one of the worst forechecking teams in the league, and because of that, they spent very little time with possession in the O-zone. They also had a very difficult time breaking out the puck as well, as they had one of the worst exit success rates as a D-corps, with everyone outside of Mo Seider ranking in the 50th percentile or below in that category. Because they couldn't break the puck out with any sort of consistency or efficiency, they very rarely had the chance to leverage their top player's skill set of attacking on the transition. The result was a team that crashed and burned, and it led to a very ugly scenario with their captain requesting a trade out of town. I'm sure it's all part of the Yzer plan, though. Next up is the villains of the NHL and the Florida Panthers. Quite simply, the price had come due to pay for going to 3 straight Cup finals. This season was pretty much lost as soon as Barkov was out for the entire year after getting hurt in camp. They dealt with a lot of injuries, and even though they still played the Florida brand of hockey, the amount of man games lost and overall fatigue meant that they absolutely stunk it up this season. Another big reason was Sergei Bobrovsky. He was a shell of his former self, and it looked like father time, as well as just overall wear and tear started to catch up to him. So Florida took a step back this season, but they have already sent the message to the league that they are coming for the head. They picked up Brady Tkachuk, Radko Gudas, and Garnet Hathaway in an attempt to create a team that will legitimately kill you on the ice next season anytime they get a chance. The biggest question mark for them remains overall team speed and goaltending as well. They feel comfortable moving off Officer Bob as they brought in Jakob Markstrom, who is also a wild card of a goaltender. So we're going to see the Panthers are doubling down on their identity as they believe last year was simply a one-off. And so does the next team, and that is the Toronto Maple Leafs. Very few teams sucked as bad as the Leafs did last season. Injuries are on every team's excuse list, and the Leafs did have their fair share, but this was a disaster from the top of the management right down to the players on the ice. They used the Mitch Marner money to bring in Matias Maccelli, Dakota Joshua, and Nick Waugh. That didn't work out too well, and also the Craig Berube system that took this Leafs team to Game 7 against the Panthers the year prior completely ran its course in a very short time period. Toronto was one of the slower teams in the league, and their defensemen struggled mightily breaking the puck out. They were dead last in pretty much every category when it came to defensive metrics. Their dump and change north-south style was not a good fit at all for the Leafs' top players, as they were ranked dead last in terms of ozone possession as well. They never had the puck, which means that they had to defend, and they were not good at that at all. They were last in the league in shots allowed, slot shots, rush chances against, and right at the bottom of the barrel for cycle shots and overall goals against. No one defended the captain when Gudas took out his knee, furthering the narrative that this team at its core has always been soft, and it would have been a complete disaster until a brilliant stroke of luck or a Gary Bettman email gave them a first overall pick. An all-time disaster of a season has led to a new era and a Leaf team that will be very interesting to watch starting next season. And finally, we have the Stanley Cup champions in the Carolina Hurricanes. Despite all the narratives and mess around them at the beginning of the year, people question if they were a true contender with their goaltending, so they picked up a kid on waivers named Brandon Bussi, and he made NHL history right away. They went into the playoffs with Freddie. He was lights out, and as soon as he falters, Bussi steps right in and carries them into the promised land. People questioned them because they didn't have a true superstar, and Carolina still showed that you can win by finding the right players who fit their system perfectly and are committed to fully buying in. They took all of what went wrong for them over the last few years, and they didn't fire the coach, they didn't change the system, they stuck to the plan and found the right players to finally break through. Now, they are the gold standard of the NHL. So there it is, what went wrong for all 32 teams and why they fell short. Let me know in the comments down below who you think disappointed their fan base the most and who you also think will have the biggest bounce back season out of all the teams going into next year. Let me know in the comments down below. I'm Anthony. I do all the breakdowns for the channel. If you want to stay up to date on all things NHL and dive deeper into the biggest moves, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so that you don't miss a single thing.